In Aristotle's classic three-act structure, the first act, the setup, traditionally introduces the main character, establishes their universe, their history, and then leads them to a challenging turning point that ensures that their life is never the same again. Then, in the second act, the confrontation, our protagonist works diligently to try to resolve the problem life has confronted them with, only to find that they've not yet developed the skills to overcome the challenge. But they must, or metaphorically, they'll die. And finally, in the third act, the resolution, our protagonist resolves the problem as best they can, and then moves on with a new sense of who they are and what they can achieve. Life, like art, has a structure. Most people, if they're lucky, get 3 acts. At present, John is navigating through Act 2, which you might call life for a concert pianist post-stroke. How that story ends? Well, that's up to him. So it's 2017, you had your stroke 9 years ago, and you're now 64. Obviously, you had this amazing career, which was tragically cut off, and can no longer play with your dominant right hand. So Johnny, what are you thinking? What do you want moving forward? How would you like your life as an artist to proceed?
I was born in a small town in West Texas called Borger, Texas in 1953. I began playing the piano at the age of 4. Shortly after my 5th birthday, it became evident that something wasn't right with me physically.
John was born with an anomaly in the urinary tract system, which led to repeated surgeries during his childhood. I think the first may have been around the time he was 5, and the last was at 22, and I think there were 7 surgeries during that time.
I experienced a lot of trauma, being shuttled back and forth to doctors, and the fear, which was paralyzing, lasted for years. And this made a normal boyhood for me pretty impossible.
He had an exterior tube that went into the bladder and went into a bag tied to his leg, which had to be changed every month, which means pulling that tube out of his abdomen, shoving it back in. It was painful. It was so profoundly intrusive. The way this kind of trauma lived in him, what it told him about himself was that he was defective, that in some ways he was broken.
I couldn't run or play or roughhouse like other kids did. I grew up in the safety, isolated indoors of my home, and I journeyed into my creativity, and I was playing the piano, and I could play everything I heard pretty much by ear.
You could take a pop song and say, hey, play this, and he literally could walk over to the piano and play it. He practiced all day for hours and hours because it was his way of saying to the world, I'm okay, and this is me.
Any music that I would hear in church or on TV or on records, I'd hear it, I'd like it, I'd have to recreate it instantaneously at the keyboard by ear. And when I did that, I got applause. It frustrated my mother because she was my first piano teacher and she wanted me to read the music. But I had to recreate what I heard by ear or create it anew. That's always been my way, which I guess is how my musical career as an improviser began. At some point, I realized something else was different about me, that I truly wasn't like other boys. And as a child, I began to think that God was making me sick because I was gay. That was my punishment. So I retreated into myself, my secret language, that utopian universe. It became my music.
Music was many different things for him in his childhood. It gave him a way to express emotion through what he was playing. It also gave him a kind of blueprint of how to cope with his suffering. You know, he resonated with songs like Climb Every Mountain. These songs were huge for John. He knew that they were talking about suffering, and he knew that he suffered. And they gave him an idea of hope.
The surgeries that I'd had by my teens to fix my medical problem, they really helped. But there had been no one or nothing in Borger, Texas in the 60s to help me psychologically.
His parents were able to take care of him in terms of his physical needs. They did not have the resources in themselves to be present for him emotionally. And so there was never any way that he could talk about the experience that he was having. That pain was excruciating for him and had an enormous impact on who he became.
We were a Southern Baptist family. For us and our community, religion was a way of life, at least the church was.
It was very important to my parents. And my dad was a deacon, my mother taught the children's choir, and we were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, Sunday school, training union. It was a huge part of our life. And John playing, I think, was just an avenue for him to play.
Playing the piano and playing an organ in services, it became a huge part of my spiritual world. We had this pianist in our church. Her name was Dorothy Smith. She played with such passion, improvising all over that church piano. And she inspired me. She was my redemption.
There were a lot of times when he would improvise and put pop songs in with Baptist hymns until the preacher caught on to it and asked him to stop.
From an early age, there were certain things and issues about the church that left me uninspired.
There was a lot of do as I say, not as I do, a lot of different things going on that we didn't really agree on, so we didn't really find it all inspiring to be there morning, noon, and night, and the people were not always nice, and it just wasn't the environment that we thought it should be.
John is a very spiritual man, and I think that has always been part of his nature. And I think that the teachings and the ideas of fundamentalism went deeply into him. Not only was there a sense of, I can do something wrong and something terrible will happen to me, but there was also the sense that I have done something wrong. I am being punished. I suffer. I mean, this is a child whose suffering was enormous.
In the Southern Baptist tradition, you're taught the Bible, the Old and New Testament, and all the basic principles of the religion. And my exposure to the Old Testament was reasonably strong. However, that testament, in my experience, is primarily taught as a historical foundation and no more. I've always been really curious about things, and I wanted to know about Jewish traditions. And then, after I attended my friend's bar mitzvah, and I felt the power in that room, I became really interested, obsessed even.
Judaism in general is a religion that tells you to question, to not accept the norm. There's no judgment about you have to believe in a certain X, Y, and Z. What your personal beliefs are is what is acceptable. What I believe attracts John to Judaism is this idea of acceptance, that you worship, you observe according to your own conscience.
That experience that I had in the synagogue at my friend's bar mitzvah, I loved it. I yearned for more. I wanted more. So I started going to the synagogue myself.
There was a sense of belonging there that I don't think he had ever experienced in his own religious community.
Temple B'nai Israel in Amarillo was the place. I heard the music there, I heard the Hebrew language. I didn't understand it, of course, at first. It was mystical to me. I remembered it. In some ways, synagogue was not unlike church, and in other ways, it was like church.
He was experiencing a way of worship that wasn't so heavily laden with rights and wrongs and punishment. And I think that went deeply into him.
I never felt judged in temple. I felt sort of a closeness, an acceptance, and I felt respected for who I was as a person. I felt like I was home. Now, the synagogue in Amarillo, on the Friday night that I went, they didn't have anyone to play the organ. So me being me, I just got up and played, not knowing anything about their liturgical music or anything. But as I'm walking up to the bima, the sweet man gives me this yarmulke to wear for the evening service. That night at home, when I showed it to my grandmother, my Southern Baptist grandmother, she takes it. She says, "Oh, I can make this." She copied it, and she made me beautiful yarmulkes for me to wear out of velvet. What do I want moving forward? I want to get back in the saddle. Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle.
All right, back in the saddle.
I met my Juilliard teacher, Adele Marcus, as a teenager in the Aspen School of Music. Before she came out, she said, "Johnny, warm up, play something, and I'll be out in a few minutes." So I improvised a fugue, Bach piece for her. I just was playing. She came out and says, "What is that?" And I told her, I said, "I'm just improvising." She was completely fascinated and said, "You're not just a pianist, you're a composer." And at that moment, she held a mirror up to me in front of my face, and I knew that that's what I was. I knew I was an improviser, a composer. And then subsequently, years later at Juilliard, when I would be struggling with a part in a piece of Liszt or some technical part that was difficult for me, she would say, "Why don't you just pretend that you wrote it? Because you don't have any problem when you do that." And it was amazing how that psychological twist in a moment changed everything for me pianistically. I knew who I was as an artist then.
At 17, John moved to New York to study at Juilliard, and then right after that, he went to NYU to study in their musical theater master's program.
My apartment was on 68th Street and Broadway, and the school is on 66th and Broadway. So I would go 2 blocks every morning before 8 o'clock when they opened the doors of the school, run up to the 4th floor and get the piano, the best one I could find to practice on for the day.
He was in a practice room playing something other than classical music, and I think I knocked on the door and I said, "Excuse me, we should meet," you know. There was nobody else at Juilliard who liked popular music besides Johnny and I. We had a lot of fun. He would play and I would sing, and we were singing pop music, and it's Juilliard, and people are like looking at us, and you know, the practice rooms have windows, and they could see and they could hear a little bit.
Well, Johnny was a lot of fun to be with. He was very flamboyant. He was very outgoing. He was, he's a giver. He loves people, and he reaches out to everyone. He has sort of a fantastic aura about him, even back then, and he was so unbelievably talented. I mean, that was a thing that just, you know, it was like you met Mozart. You know, you met Johnny and you thought, oh, this was what Mozart must have been like. My theory teacher would sometimes ask us to write music, and I would have to write like a fugue, and it would be for like the next day. So I would come over and say, "Johnny, I've got to write this fugue. Can you do it for me?" And he'd say, "Sure. How do you want it?" And then he'd sit down at the piano and he'd play this amazing fugue. And I'd say, "Oh yeah, that'll do. That's great. You know, can you write it down?" "Sure." And that was that. That was my fugue.
John
was immediately identifiable as a future star. And my father, who was one of the founders of the William Morris Theatrical Agency, he was the chairman of the board worldwide, immediately recognized the talent that was before him. And we started a family friendship and a professional relationship at the same time, with the goal to get to Carnegie Hall.
Everything was great, but then it got even better. In 1978, I met my childhood hero. My mentor, the one, the only Leonard Bernstein.
I met him on my birthday, August the 25th. It's his birthday, too.
For the next 12 years, we shared the most wonderful friendship. Mentor, student, father, son.
I miss him every day.
The gift that Leonard Bernstein gave me was a gift of confidence. Complete confidence in my way of making music. He would say, Johnny, don't be ashamed or afraid of the way you make music. You make music the way you make music. Just trust yourself. Just do it. And sometimes maybe I'd be playing something softly for him, and he'd say, it sounds like you really want that soft there. Well, I do. Well, play it soft, he would say. Don't lift your hand from the piano. Keep it there. Keep it still. Have the courage to be still and soft and take your time. "1978 was a magical year. I had started really composing original songs of my own, and I had made an appointment of William Morris to go play some of the songs for one of the agents there. So I went and met the conductor. His name was Emil Kahn, and he said, Mr. Bayliss, we want you to play two pieces. One being Rhapsody in Blue, the other is your choice. So I began asking my friends and Roger Englander what should be the best thing for me to do. I only had 6.5, 7 weeks to prepare this. And I thought, well, I'll write my own. It's easier for me to do than learn some other piece, really it is. So I wrote my own piece to play in Carnegie. And the thing that drove me and that helped keep me not only focused, but this was like a laser beam, is just hearing Lenny's words to me. Don't be afraid to be the original that you are. Just make music the way you make music. So I played Rhapsody in Blue, and then my piece is called Essay for Piano and Orchestra in 3 movements to close out my debut at Carnegie Hall. A day I'll never forget. It was unbelievable and great. The thing about Carnegie Hall is I remember distinctly, I had one day that I could go and play the piano by myself on that stage just to rehearse. And I thought, oh boy, it's going to be nerve-wracking to walk out on that stage. But actually when I did it was one of the most comforting things in the world. I felt like I had done it 100 times because I think of all of the people that have performed there, the history, the legacy. There's no way you could play badly in that hall. It's so beautiful, and so inviting and so comforting. You just want to make the best music you can.
When you say you want to get back in the saddle, what do you mean? What does that look like? Paint a picture. Fantasy dream.
Carnegie Hall. That's what it looks like, getting back to Carnegie Hall.
So, question. How do you get to Carnegie Hall, everybody?
So I started my master's degree at NYU in 1981. The teachers that we had the first couple of years, Arthur Lawrence, Betty Comden, Adolph Green, Julie Stein, Stephen Sondheim, Leonard Bernstein, the giants of musical theater, they were our teachers. And my fellow classmates, Robert Friedman, who wrote A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, Steve Letback, also A Gentleman's Guide, Winnie Holtzman, the book To Wicked and many television shows. That was my class. Those were my classmates.
It was shortly after John's Carnegie Hall debut that we met. A friend of mine was working at the William Morris Agency. I think John had just started the NYU Graduate Musical Theater program, and I was already at NYU Graduate Film School. And I was looking for a composer to score my 43-minute thesis film, Beyond Measure. At that time, John was playing cocktail piano at this restaurant on the east side called La Bibliothèque. And we walk in, and John's sitting at the piano wearing this double-breasted navy blue blazer, ascot around his neck, that shock of red hair, and he's holding court. You know, all these people are swooning over him. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy seems like he's some kind of musical genius. So we met about my thesis film. Rachmaninoff had been my inspiration for the film, and it turned out that Rachmaninoff was his favorite composer. So we collaborated, and the film won Best, I think it won the Silver Award for Best Short Subject Film at the Houston International Film Festival. His Carnegie Hall debut. He'd been in the NYU Graduate Musical Theater program. What followed was a pretty illustrious 30-year career as a pianist and composer.
That's good.
That was the one?
Okay. We have...
Let me do one where it's even more real. That was more voiceover-y. I'll try to do one a little bit. All that hard work and of Julie Andrews, Rosemary Clooney, Van Cliburn, Liberace, countless others. He's recorded he's recorded chart-topping albums. Bach Meets the Beatles. I'll give you. In the 90s, he was the most successful artist to cross over from classical to pop. That's a go narrator, and I'm not.
I feel like
In my show, there's a section that happens right after intermission that my partner Bruce always called Stump the Piano Player. I really wanted something a little more lofty and grand, so I called it Improvisations with the Audience. And what that was is someone would call out the name of a popular song, someone else would call out a composer, famous composer, and I'd improvise that piece on the spot for them. For instance, Embraceable You in the style of Beethoven, or Mozart G minor symphony first movement theme in the style of Marvin Hamlisch, which is a hoot. Tico Tico in the style of Wagner, Begin to Begin in the style of Mahler. I mean, these things, they went on all night. This is a way for me to communicate with the audience, to find out their tastes and what they liked, what they didn't like. It was one of my favorite parts of the concert to do.
Stroke. A sudden disabling attack or loss of consciousness caused by an interruption in the flow of blood to the brain, especially through thrombosis, seizure, ictus.
Realized his right side and left him alone and isolated from the world he'd always known and loved. One more time.
last time.
That was better.
I know. Thank you. No, I wouldn't, better in terms of looking up and down. It was sort of like my eyeball.
It's like God took the light switch and turned it off. You know, it was an incredibly dark period. Stroke. An act of hitting or striking someone or something. A blow. Or in my case, a sudden disabling attack or loss of consciousness caused by an interruption of the flow of blood to the brain, especially through thrombosis, seizure, ictus. Bruce and I had just moved into our new house in the Palm Springs area. It was early Sunday morning, around 3 o'clock, and I woke up after having this horrible, demonic, horrific dream. And I noticed my right arm felt like I'd slept on it wrong. But I woke Bruce up and told him about it. I was really, really scared. And it was hot in the room, and I went to the thermostat to turn the air conditioner down and make it cooler. 20 minutes later, I was asleep, but he woke me up because my breathing was labored. And at that moment, when he woke me up, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. My right side was completely paralyzed. I couldn't even sit up in the bed. He tried to sit me up in the bed. I had to be propped up with pillows while he called 911. After the preliminary tests at Eisenhower Medical Center, the the doctors came to the conclusion that I'd had a brain bleed, a small bleed on my brain, which took out my right side. In seconds, my whole life was different. 50-some-odd years of practicing the piano and being able to do anything I wanted to at the piano, it didn't matter anymore. It's like, it's gone in a flash. I could do anything I wanted to before this. Now I only had 5 fingers. I asked myself many times, why do I bother? Why would I want to bother? It was a very, very dark moment in my life. A total game changer. Before my stroke, there wasn't enough time to do everything. Now there wasn't anything but time. Nothing I really wanted to do. How do you spend time when all you have is time and everything seems lost? But I really hadn't lost everything. I still had my heart and my head and Bruce, my angel. Thank God for him. Bruce was in my life for 27 years as my husband, my collaborator, and my best friend. 5 years after my stroke, I lost him to cancer. And after he died, I really didn't want to play anymore. With only 5 fingers, 1 hand, what's the point? My heart was broken. Losing him was more difficult and impossible than really losing my right hand. At least I had my left. But I didn't care. I didn't care. It all seemed hopelessly impossible at that time.
Carnegie Hall. Seriously? Is that even remotely possible?
Yeah. I mean, look, I never played for grand ambitions to be the best or anything. I think when I was a kid, I saw how it made other people feel, how it made me feel, the music. And I've still got that juice in me. I've still got that desire. I want to continue that. Yes, it's possible. Yes. It's like God took the light switch and turned it off. It was an incredibly dark period. A few months after the stroke, I had yet another loss. I lost my great friend, Henry Steinway. I got a call from the Steinway family, Henry's wife and children, and they wanted me to come and play for his memorial. The Steinway family said, please come and be a part of this. You can sing, you can dance, you can play something, you can speak, whatever, just be here. And I said, please give me a day and let me think about it. And even though I knew Madeline was right, I knew it was going to be challenging, because here I'm walking out on the stage in front of peers, colleagues, people that had known me with not only 2 hands but 2 legs. And this is the first time out of the gate I'm playing in front of people. It's like I heard Henry's voice in the back of my head saying, get on with it, get on with it. The piece that I composed for Henry's service, I called Elegy. I composed it for the left hand alone. And it was the first time I played on the stage in front of people after I had a stroke. And that was a great day. Sad day, but a good day. Never forget that day. At the time of Henry's memorial, my friend Bonnie Barrett was working at Steinway. A few months later, she made a switch, and she became the head of Yamaha Artist Services, the chief liaison for artists and Yamaha pianos. And she came to me with this idea that the Yamaha Disclavier technology might be a way for me to get back in the game.
At that moment, I thought, well, at the very least, he could record one hand to the Disclavier and just simply play it back while he played the other hand to that accompaniment. For me, it was just an incredibly emotional experience, because it was John. He was back, both hands.
I would record my left hand or my right hand part and play back, and I would have 2 hands then. This would give me a second chance. So I said, okay, I want to see what that possibility would look like. Then the ideas came and thoughts, who am I now? What did I really want? What did I want my life to look like going forward?
Bruce and I met in 1986. We were married September the 14th, 2013. He died 2 months later. He was in my life for 27 years. As my husband, my collaborator, and my best friend. 5 years ago, cancer took him away from me. That's about 5 years after a blood clot on the left side of my brain took away those gifts God had given me, at least those gifts given to my right side. A talent I'd built my life around, that allowed me to show who I was and hide who I was, express my feelings or hide my feelings. Gifts that gave me the ability to communicate with or hide from the world. My secret language, my voice, all gone in a flash. And then suddenly, without Bruce, I'm left all alone. With only the memory of our love to carry me.
Those feelings I had as a young teenager of knowing something was different but not being able to identify it, it suddenly became clearer after my stroke. And I'm not talking about my sexuality. When you have a stroke, you realize how precious time is. And I realized that it was time to do the things that I wanted to do but didn't have time before. You might think that I wanted to immediately get back in the saddle, start my act two. Well, yes and no. Incredibly daunting to start over at my age. First, I needed to figure some things out. Things I'd wanted to figure out my whole life, but couldn't because of the time demands on my career. And one of those things that I really wanted to do after the stroke was to learn Hebrew. Yeah, believe it or not, I wanted to learn Hebrew. Exploring those feelings I had as a kid that I was Jewish. After stroke, you have a lot of time to look inward, to internalize things, to look inside and figure out what matters. Through my Hebrew teacher, Gail Jacobs, I met a whole community of people, incredible people who embraced me and I them. And somehow, I knew I'd come home. Years of classes in Hebrew and formal Judaism followed. And I converted in 2013, shortly after Bruce passed away. And one of his wishes was that I be bar mitzvah, and I was, February 2017.
My Hebrew name is Yonatan ben Yehuda. So, you know how we all have this illusion that we're separated by our historical narratives, that you're this and I'm that and never the twain shall meet? Well, I kind of felt that way on my path to Judaism. I don't know. Sometimes I felt like an imposter until my rabbi quoted Maimonides to me, who said, "It was the soul of a convert that was at Sinai when Moses received the Ten Commandments." That jived with something a psychic once told me. I said to her, "I don't understand this. I don't understand this. All my life I've felt Jewish. Why?" She said, "John, I see that you were a young Jewish pianist whom the Nazis took during the Holocaust. They promised to spare your parents if you would play for them. They broke their promise." Then she said, "John, we may die, but the desire of a soul to continue on its path does not."